So let's look at some of those stories in more detail and how the media is discussing them. We start with The Guardian and the Swedish general election, which has, as we've just explained, left the two main political blocs almost tied, with the anti-immigration party coming in third, doing much better than many expected. Financial Times says the EU is preparing to give its Brexit negotiator Michel Barnier new instructions to help close a deal with Britain. The move is seen as an attempt to help bolster the UK Prime Minister's stance as she comes under pressure from hardline Brexiteers at home in her own government. On the Reuters website, it looks at the US and EU trade chiefs holding their meeting today in Brussels. They're talking about the fact that they're trying to pursue a closer transatlantic relationship. The US president did agree to drop his threat of tariffs on EU cars in July. Next, do you yearn for a shorter working week? We've talked about this already. This is The Independent reporting on the comments made by the leader of Britain's trade union movement, Francis O'Grady, who's called for the power of technology to be used to give workers a 4-day week and also pay workers more. And finally, talking of days off, would you be able to refrain from spending downtime drinking alcohol? The Telegraph is saying, according to Public Health England, middle-aged drinkers should abstain from drinking for a number of days a week to improve their health. Well, Cornelia is back. Cornelia Meyer of MRL Corporation. Cornelia, let's get started with the Sweden election. And the Guardian talks about the deadlock for the main parties as the far right makes significant gains, and yet the main parties do not want to work with the Sweden Democrats.
Yeah, it's a very similar situation as we had in Germany with the AfD, with the Alternative für Deutschland. And it's interesting, I've done the numbers here according to the polls. And, you know, so far the Social Democrats have worked with the Greens, with support from the left. And if you add them up, they're at 40.6%. The other ones also, they're even lower. So it's very tough. So in many ways, the Sweden Democrats, this sort of alt-right movement, which sort of is a little bit like the National Front was in Britain when there was a National Front, is really getting very hard. And you see all across Europe.
And whether they like it or not, the two main parties, they have to recognise the fact that, you know, nearly 1 in 5 people voted for the Sweden Democrats, and therefore they have this strong power in the Swedish electoral process and in the democratic system going forward.
Yes, but if you look at it, it goes across Europe. You know, it is in Germany. We have the Alternative für Deutschland. We have Geert Wilders in Holland.
You've got Viktor Orban in Hungary.
Yeah, we have the Austrians are also, especially foreign minister, very anti-immigration.
Europe is changing, isn't it?
It's changing, and I think this intake of immigration has changed the narrative, has changed what people believing. And the interesting thing, though, is when all the immigrants came in 2015, we now have only about 90% fewer immigrants coming into these European countries, but they're really grappling with how to come to terms with this new changed situation.
And this is how there needs to be strong leadership within Europe, really, across the board. But
absolutely.
Unfortunately, they're not all on the same page.
And you know, some of these countries, Alternative für Deutschland, I don't know enough about the Swedish Democrats, but they seem to be in that vein. Geert Wilders, they don't really believe in those values that we, you know, Europeans are actually nice people. They pride themselves in being liberal.
But they would argue they are nice people, but they're nice people that don't
they're
necessarily want to have to take in more.
Yes, exactly.
Immigrants.
They're happy to be nice people with to their own, but not to other people. But the interesting thing here is, which is a little bit difficult to grasp, is, you know, Sweden is this welfare state, and part of that is that, you know, the Sweden Democrats had a good thing there, saying, look, we have this welfare state, we like the welfare state, we like this liberal welfare state, but if we have too many foreigners coming in, there will not be enough hospital spaces for us, and we will have to give up on this long-established welfare state.
That's what attracts those, isn't it, to certain countries? I mean, that's certainly the attraction of the UK, is the size of our welfare state, the way the National Health Service works, all that kind of thing.
Yes, but we are not taking in anything compared to Sweden or Germany, or so we are sort of big laggards in that.
the UK.
Yes.
Now, let's look at the UK, the big challenge at the moment, the political challenge for Theresa May. The Financial Times says there's relief for May. She may be relieved to hear that this morning, as Barnier is set for go-ahead to pin down Brexit deal. This is just talking about the fact that Michel Barnier, the Brexit negotiator on the part of Brussels, is being given the go-ahead to nail this down. Let's make progress. Brussels wants to move on. It has to, doesn't it?
Absolutely, we have to. And you know, it's what Dominic Raab, the UK negotiator, calls Michel Barnier dogmatic legalism. But you know, he had to negotiate within the brief that he was given from the EU. They're now opening the brief. But Britain should be very careful. You know, yesterday the Commerce Secretary was on the BBC actually and said, well, you know, we have checkers and they have to take checkers. It is still a negotiation. We should not say, oh, it's now all hunky-dory. It's not hunky-dory. It's still a negotiation. There will still be stumbling blocks.
So ambassadors in Brussels have been told that, as well as, you know, the planned timing of any deal, as the sticking points such as the Irish border, the meeting will discuss whether to issue additional guidance to Michel Barnier, the EU's chief negotiator, to move on these issues. And it's the recognition that there has to be progress because, of course, we're not far at all from October.
No, we're 200 days.
And the national
we're 200 days from exiting the EU.
The 27, you know, EU governments have to sign off on whatever's agreed.
The parliaments have to sign off, as has our parliament. So, but this is very positive, but we should not mistake it for being out of the woods yet.
No, we know that. I think we're well aware we're not out of the woods. Let's have a look at Reuters then. The EU-US trade negotiations going on today in Brussels. How optimistic are you about that? The guest I was talking to earlier on Business Briefing, she sounded quite optimistic. But again, there's a lot to bargain for if you try and get an agreement on agriculture and cars. It's by no means an easy road.
Yeah, you see, and then at this point, not talking about cars, they're talking about non-auto industrials. But the EU must come to an agreement with the US. Because cars are so important, as we discussed earlier, to the German economy, to the French economy, and Germany is the engine of the EU economies. So we cannot afford not to come to an agreement. But it's going to be tough, especially on agriculture.
Now, Frances O'Grady, the leader of the TUC, the General Secretary, which is obviously one of the biggest trade union bodies here in the UK, she is going to be saying in her speech later that we need to be looking at a future where workers work 4 days a week. They're paid more for that. We need to share the wealth from new technology with the workers. Would you at least agree with that point?
Well, you know,
this is a two-pronged.
This is a two-pronged thing, and she's absolutely right. Those who would work for the likes of Amazon for a pittance and, you know, nearly drop
and even
from
those
being
who don't
overworked.
Work for Amazon, but they're, for example, the delivery company.
Yeah, exactly. Those people, they need to be compensated adequately, one, and secondly, and they need to be paid adequate wages. She's absolutely right there. But when she goes into the 4-day week, look, work will change. With modern technology, we'll work more from home, we'll work more on the go. But in a country that is really sort of a little bit of a laggard as we are in terms of competitiveness, in competitiveness indexes, I think this is probably, and going into Brexit, this is probably not the time to talk about a 4-day week.
But many would argue that, you know, who do work for, I mean, I work a 4-day week, but that's partly because I work such bizarre, unusual hours, and I've got 3 young children I'm looking after, so I'm kind of working at home anyway. But actually, that work-life balance of having a flexibility about your working and not doing 5 days on, 2 days off, the flexibility of work actually is very good for physical health and mental health.
Well, absolutely, flexibility is good, but I'm saying flexibility is good, but it doesn't necessarily equate to a 4-day week. Plus, the flexibility needs to work within the confines of whatever the corporation needs to achieve.
Now, I know the viewers will find this very hard to believe, but both Cornelia and I are in our middle age. And it says here, middle-aged wine drinkers are urged to have days off. Now, come on, Cornelia, would you at least agree with that?
I
don't agree with a day off work, but a day off.
Absolutely,
a day off a glass of wine.
Absolutely, I agree with that. And during Lent, I don't drink, and it's good for me. And during Ramadan, I don't drink coffee.
But
and
you were saying earlier, off air, another thing you'll find shocking is Cornelia is fueled by caffeine, coffee. You can drop the booze, but you struggle with dropping the coffee.
I totally struggle with dropping. And as I said, during Lent, I do no booze, and that's easy peasy. And during Ramadan, out of sympathy, I do no coffee.
And you get the
terrible.
shakes.
Yeah.
She gets the shakes. Cornelia, it's been great to have you here. Fueled by coffee at this early hour.